I finished The Last of Us Part 2 on Wednesday the 1st of July 2020. I started this review script the weekend before, and have subsequently deleted the whole thing and rewritten it 5 or 6 times since. This game is a hard one to grasp on occasion. It challenges your preconceptions, challenges standard storytelling and gameplay norms, isn't a Greek comedy like the first game, and ends in a manner that sort of has more questions than answers. The Last of Us Part 2 is a great game, but a couple of minor design and directional choices prevent it from being a masterpiece in my eyes and reaching the same heights as its predecessor. My name is Doragon, and this is my full review of The Last of Us Part 2. The biggest strengths and the biggest weaknesses of this game are contained within its story. It simultaneously elevates the game to the heights of praise it has received and backs up every negative take on it that you've seen across the internet. So before deep diving into that and giving it my take on the matter, let's take a look at the other aspects of this game. This almost goes without saying at this point. The first-party PlayStation studios are amazing at eking out every last bit of performance from the PlayStation hardware, and Naughty Dog have, over the course of the last 2 generations, been the absolute best at that. Here is no different. Everything in The Last of Us Part 2 looks stunning. The character models look almost real, with fine hair detail unrivaled elsewhere, and skin that looks like it was scanned in. The world around them, whether coated in powdered snow or showing Seattle reclaimed by nature, is beautiful and broken, conveyed so brilliantly with a camera pan of the right stick across the landscape. Weapons, buildings and interiors look incredible, and I do not think water has ever looked better in a video game. My only complaint is that this isn't something that you can see unless you actually play the game. Naughty Dog have given The Last of Us Part 2 a film grain effect that makes screenshots, recorded gameplay and streams look awful in comparison to the first-hand experience. This is definitely a game you should play or watch someone play in the same room. This game is the most graphically achieved to ever grace any PlayStation system, and should be celebrated as such. Having seen the work in just this aspect of the finished product, you start to get a sense of why it took 7 years to get this next installment, because this game is quite simply a graphical marvel. Through God of War 1, 2, 3, Chains of Olympus, Ghost of Sparta, and Ascension, 6 games across 3 consoles, the mechanics barely changed. In a lot of ways, this is a great thing and keeps continuity from the last released game, which was Ascension, to the first released game, which was God of War. In others, however, it was tiring, as you got a massive sense of being there, done that. Every review I have ever read for the God of War sequels before the 2018 installment somewhere mentioned, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And in many ways, The Last of Us Part 2 also falls into that category. Throughout this game you play as 3 characters. You play as Joel, you play as Ellie, and you play as a newcomer, Abby. Joel is the strongest hark back to the original game. It's that distinctive feeling you had playing through the 2013 installment. Ellie is familiar, having played as her in that initial game and a subsequent DLC, but she's grown up some and has gained some additional skill sets and tools. Abby is an utter powerhouse by comparison and a trained warrior. She's much more deadly and tanky than either of the other 2 playable characters. While each character plays ever so slightly differently through skill sets and weapons that they may pick up through their campaign, the overall gameplay loop is exactly the same as the 2013 installment. You scavenge for parts and supplies, you craft items, do your absolute best to never use those items, use them anyway, nearly die in every single enemy encounter, then rinse and repeat. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? As mentioned with the God of War analogy, this is simultaneously great and terrible. It makes the story and world feel totally connected and consistent, and with the resources available being even more scarce than in the first game, it makes it feel like time is actually passing. This is a powerful feeling to convey from gameplay alone. There is, however, such an overwhelming feeling of been there, done that by the midpoint of the game you want something new to be introduced to keep things fresh. But nothing is. And this makes the second half of the game drag, even though it is as well told as the first. Thankfully, however, combat is very satisfying. Ellie is completely different to Joel last time out, and as such you need to approach encounters differently. You cannot blindly charge in and lock your way to victories as you did before. Everything has to be measured and planned ahead of time if you are to survive. And Naughty Dog have opened up the approach for you as well. You have 3 main approaches to encounters as Ellie. You have the sneak approach to try and get through without being detected, without killing anything, and it is possible. You can also approach it in what I call the Assassin's Creed manner, and silently take everybody out with your knife. Or you can go for the Rick O'Connell approach. Face first, guns blazing, getting your mate shot in the arse. I would highly recommend avoiding this latter option. Abby has the same combat options as Ellie, but with her backstory and abilities to take more damage, a direct approach is often more feasible, with her 2 most powerful weapons being those mega biceps. She is heavier than Ellie, and you feel that in both your movements and attacks. I'd often find myself getting punched to death simply because Abby is slower than Ellie, and I'd need to recalibrate my muscle memory between characters. Without the use of a knife like Ellie, stealth was a different approach as well. Of course you can craft shivs like you did in the first game, but they're a single-use item and best saved for the likes of clickers and other infected. So I often relied on silencers, arrows, and silent takedowns on enemies that could be taken down that way to achieve my personal stealth approach. The switching between Abby and Ellie kept combat fresh throughout, and it was satisfying enough on either character to carry the whole game. As Joel, we never see combat in part 2, but that's fine by me, as the others more than make up for it, keeping encounters fresh and flowing throughout. Overall, the gameplay is good. It does feel slightly dated, but that's been done to maintain continuity between the first game and this one. A design choice that I fully understand and in many ways like, but I do wish there was slightly more variety outside of combat, which has had a minor overhaul. I want more of those moments like in the first game, where exploration and characterization carry the plot and the player autonomy, rather than just being a route to the next combat encounter. I thoroughly enjoyed playing this game, but I do understand those comments about it being slightly dated. There are lots of details about this game that I personally don't have enough to say on to fill a full sector of this video on their own. I probably could if I put my mind to it, but it's more a question of whether I should when a few lines can convey my feelings well enough. So let's start with sound. And holy heck, the sound. It's one of those aspects that is ever present but rarely spoken about in video games. I've talked previously about the importance of gun sounds in FPSs and the rustling of leaves and surrounding world in stealth titles. What Naughty Dog do with The Last of Us Part 2 is take sound to a completely new level. I mean, just listen to this. From the scuff of Ellie's feet when she doesn't quite pick them up, the swing of the bat, the exertion it takes to swing it, and that glass, the breaking, the falling, the shattering on the ground, and the crunch as Ellie walks over it. Every facet of sound has been thought about and instigated in a way that heightens the experience, intensifies what you're doing. Sound is so integral to The Last of Us Part 2 and The Last of Us Part 1. There's a mode where you listen, you can hear where things are within the room. It's part of the mechanics of the game. And Naughty Dog, when they set out to make The Last of Us Part 2, obviously thought that sound was so important that they took it to levels I don't think any other game has ever been to. Next up, I want to talk about acting. It's another aspect that oftentimes gets overlooked in video games. Because you are the character, you're playing as the character, you forget there's another person who has put months, maybe even years of work into bringing this character to life in voice recording booths and motion capture studios. Ashley Johnson as Ellie is stupendous. You feel what Ellie feels. Part of that is the relationship we built with the character in the previous game, but a massive part of that is the way that Ashley brings this character to life. The emotion in the words, the force in her actions. She really, as a main character, holds this game up in multiple different ways because she has beautiful moments of sweetness, happiness. She portrays complex emotions from sorrow to rage to even PTSD. There is so much range that she has to touch. And she brings it perfectly. Some of that's credit to the direction, of course, but so much of that comes down to the actor themselves, linking in and becoming the character on screen, on stage, in the motion capture works. And it doesn't matter who, it's not just the leads, it's not just the main characters, it doesn't matter whether it's Ashley Johnson, Laura Bailey, Troy Baker, anybody who sets foot onto the set of The Last of Us Part 2, whether it's in just voice-over work or motion capture, are exceptional. There is nothing in this game that doesn't feel like it is acted to the absolute pinnacle that that person could achieve. There are hundreds of other little things that I'm quite sure I could go into, but they failed to come to mind whilst I was writing this script and whilst I'm recording this review right now. If I think of them later on, I might put a little bit at the end saying, oh yeah, this, that and the other really sorted it out. But every little touch, every little change, the attention to detail that Naughty Dog bring to so many of their games has really heightened my personal experience of The Last of Us Part 2. And whichever facet of the game any of the developers worked upon, any of the artists, anybody within the studio, whatever you did to help this game come to light, just know that people like me do thank you. So this is it. This is the moment. The story, the plot, the characters. The part that has divided the internet. Now, before we get into it, I want to raise a few things, a few points and a few quotes that explain my viewpoint on The Last of Us Part 2. So first and foremost, spoilers will be rampant. Secondly, no one in the world of The Last of Us is innocent. There are no good guys or bad guys in this universe. Next, every single person is the protagonist of their own story. And finally, this little nugget of information from Kratos.
Back off, Kratos. This has nothing to do.
This path you walk, vengeance, you will find no peace. I know.
At the end of the PlayStation 3 era, who would have thought that Kratos would become the voice of reason? It's actually quite amazing how God of War parallels this game so regularly. And I'm not talking the 2018 version, I'm talking the old school God of War where Kratos was on a pure quest of rage-fueled vengeance. Because that's what Ellie is on in this one. A pure quest of rage-fueled vengeance. Soon after the announcement of The Last of Us Part 2, Neil Druckmann did an interview where he explained what the story of the second game was going to be. He mentioned it was going to be the complete antithesis to the first game, which was all about hope and love. The Last of Us Part 2 was all about hate. He was right. He was very right. So let's start looking at those parts that make up the whole. I'll start with the prologue. We begin maybe a week or so after the end of the previous game. We're talking from Joel's perspective. We're talking to Tommy and we're explaining what happened in that hospital. How we killed everybody there to free Ellie. There's no vaccination because Joel couldn't let go. Now on that front, I want to point out here that I think Joel was right. A vaccination is not a cure. A cure would be able to reverse what has happened to other people. What the Fireflies were talking about through the entirety of the first game was a vaccination which would stop anybody else from getting sick. Massive bonus, big change, but not the cure that everybody laments. To build a cure, you need active live antibodies. You wouldn't go cutting part of somebody's brain out. So, to me, and there are plenty of scientific looks into this that back it up beyond reasonable doubt, Joel did the right thing because the Fireflies were hacks. They didn't know what they were doing and they were going to kill their only option at saving the world. The problem is that Ellie always suspects that Joel has lied to her. Even at the end of the first game, while she accepts his words, you can tell from the look in her face that she doesn't actually trust him. And so we get to the start of this game, and we see a 13-year-old Ellie once more, or 15-year-old, however old she was at the time. We see Ellie from the first game, not really wanting to engage with Joel when he pops around with a guitar and teaches her a beautiful song. But she does, and we see flashbacks as the game progresses, explaining their journey to the sort of standoffish, fraught relationship that we see at the start of the game. That is a lot of people's first problem. Why would Ellie hate Joel, blah de blah? Play the game. Examine and understand the story that is being told to you. It's being told in a non-linear fashion, very similar to the first series of The Witcher. And personally, I love that. It means you don't know everything until that very final moment, at which point everything falls into place and the game makes perfect sense and it suddenly becomes something more than what you've played up to that point. But so many people have been getting bent out of shape, have been leaving terrible comments on videos across the internet, on people's personal channels where they just want to say, yeah, I really liked this, or no, I didn't like it because of this. They've spouted hate and vitriol because at the start of the game, the relationship that we knew from the end of the last one is essentially gone. I personally sort of expected that to be the case. You've got a teenage girl, you've got an aging father figure. They've only known each other a few years. It's not like they've been father-daughter all their lives. It's been a very short-term relationship in that regard. And any teenager is going to rebel against a parent. But they live in a post-apocalyptic world. Ellie knows that she had the possibility to be a vaccine or a cure. She's not sure why she's alive, why the Fireflies didn't do what they did. She has questions, and through the course of the game, you see her answering those questions. But right at the start, you enter into her life, you meet the new people in her life in Jackson, the people that she's come to know and love alongside Joel whilst they've been living there. She goes out on patrols in the area, making sure the infected are taken out, helping any passers-by if they need it. It's a very positive way of looking at this terrible world that they live in and the terrible things that they have done. Ellie seems happy in her new life, but a couple of hours into the game, in a cutscene, it all changes. Abby, the other character that we've been playing as in the prologue, suddenly shoots Joel in the leg after being saved by him. Joel's response is class. Say your little speech and let's get this over with. Joel knows he's about to die and has made peace with that. He knows it's for something that he has done in his past. But Ellie comes to save him, and she doesn't know that. All she sees is her father figure, the man that, through everything she's ended up looking up to in the last few years. And he is murdered in front of her eyes with a golf club to the head. This moment has been the centre of most people's issue with the game. You've done bad by our characters. This is not my Last of Us, and so on and so forth. To me, this is perfect. There were always going to be problems following up the original game, but to give everybody such an emotional sucker blow as to kill off one of their most beloved characters, as to kill off a PlayStation mascot within the first 2 hours of the game, is brave. And it gives the player the impetus to go on this revenge spree that Ellie follows. It's a hard sell, and I understand why a lot of people love it. Through that last game, we fell in love with this roguish bad guy, and he was a bad guy to so many people. But we now have to mourn him, and we have to make a journey ourselves, just as Ellie does. This moment is the beauty of The Last of Us, and it will happen over and over again through the course of this game. Naughty Dog's storytelling, the acting on display, everything about it makes you feel exactly the same way as the character. The love for Joel, the pain at losing him, the rage and the quest for vengeance. You feel it just as strongly as Ellie does. And that right there justifies everything that Naughty Dog did to the character of Joel. Doesn't matter whether you think it was right or wrong, he's their character, and it pushes the story as it needs to. I made a few statements at the start of this sector. Nobody is innocent. There are no good guys or bad guys in the universe of The Last of Us. Look at Joel here from the first game. Torturing one character, murdering many, many more. He has hurt so many people. He's not innocent. And that's why this works so well, because you suddenly realise that Abby will have had her own justification for killing Joel. Just like we now have our own justification for hunting her down across the country and trying to kill her. Joel was not a good guy by any means, but we loved him because of the journey that we went on with him and the character development that we saw. To Abby though, Joel is just the bastard who murdered her dad. He's the bad guy in her story. Every single person is the protagonist of their own story. So in Abby's, Joel is the bad guy, and he got what he deserved. And that sets up an interesting dichotomy for the rest of this game. You've got two characters who wholeheartedly believe that their revenge is 100% justified. In a lawless world, it probably is. But you then get the question of, where does it stop? Well, Ellie's got an interesting choice on that. It stops with her. You see, the next half of the game is her revenge story. Her travelling to Seattle with Dina, her hunting down Abby and her friends. And that's the important bit there. She hunts down her friends. It might seem a little old-fashioned, it might seem a little Assassin's Creed. Oh, let's get a list of everybody I need to kill and hunt them down. But in the grand scheme of things, when you've got this revenge cycle going on, which granted, okay, Ellie doesn't rightfully know about at this point, but when you've got this revenge cycle going on, somewhere it needs to end, and one way to do that is to take out everybody involved. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but it is a way to do it. At about the 15-hour mark, it comes to a head and Abby confronts Ellie, storming her base, killing Jesse, and seriously wounding Tommy. Everything is about to climax, we're about to get our revenge, and suddenly, we cut to black. Wait, what? We're playing as Abby now? Okay, a little bit of backstory before we get into it. Oh, this is the second half of the game? For the second half of the game, you play as Abby. This is one of those things that I actually called a misstep in my intro, and upon reflection as I've got further and further from the game, I want to take that comment back, because I don't actually feel that it is. Like the killing of Joel early on, this is an incredibly brave narrative step. This step is taken to show you that comment that I made earlier. Everyone is the protagonist in their own story. And to Abby, Ellie is the antagonist. She's killed all of her friends. Ellie's father figure killed her father. And now all she wants to do is kill Ellie. You see that cycle of revenge thing coming round again? Many comments state that the Abby half of the game is to make you sympathise with Joel's killer. And it's not. You aren't meant really to sympathise with any side of this. Everybody is evil to somebody else. Nobody is innocent. Everybody is the protagonist in their own story. And what you've got here is two quite separate stories converging on a point of mutual revenge. Abby's half of the game goes a long way to humanizing her. Up until this point, you've only known her as the ultimate bad guy. She killed Joel. She killed one of my favorite PlayStation characters. And I felt terrible for the first 4 or 5 hours of playing as Abby. I hated her still. But she goes on a very similar journey to what Joel did in the first game. She moves from being this self-obsessed, revenge-driven bad guy into a character that you can actually relate to. And that's a powerful thing, because by the time you get back, having gone through all the trauma that Abby has to go through, losing her friends, finding new ones, losing most of them, it's a harrowing story that, unless you are completely callous or missing the point, makes you feel that this whole thing, this whole game, is futile. And if you felt futile by the time that final confrontation comes round, all that means is that Naughty Dog landed every single point. Thanks to Lev, Abby's sole remaining friend, Ellie lives, as does Dina, as does Abby, as does Lev. Everybody survives. And we get this beautiful epilogue at a farm. Ellie's happy, Dina's had her baby, so we're talking at least a year later here. But Ellie has PTSD. She dreams about that night and has flashes of it during the day. She has no closure on the matter, and as such, it pushes us into the final section of the epilogue. She goes to hunt down Abby and finish it, and put her mind to rest. At this point in the game, I was very much in two minds, but this epilogue section in Santa Barbara, where you play once more as Abby and once more as Ellie, trying to finalize and finish each individual story, really sold me on The Last of Us Part 2. Me as the player at this point had let go of my hatred for Abby. I didn't want to take revenge, but I love Ellie so much. 2 games to get to this point, and she needs that closure. She can't live with this hanging over her for the rest of her life. But it's a very bittersweet moment when you find Abby and Lev. They've been strung up, they're weak, as is Ellie, but she has a flash just as she's about to let them go and end the cycle. And the whole revenge thing kicks off again. This final fight with Abby is brilliant, because it means both characters let go of the hatred that they've held for one another, and allows them to move on. There is a lot of damage done to either character. Abby gets stabbed, slashed multiple times and nearly drowned. If it's not for that flash of Joel in the last memory, the last thing you see in this game that Ellie has, Abby wouldn't be alive. Ellie loses 2 fingers, much blood and probably another broken nose. But that memory of Joel on his front porch is where Ellie began to forgive him, the night before he died. That flash of him playing guitar is what convinced her to let her vengeance go.
This has nothing to do.
This path you walk, vengeance, you will find no peace. I know.
And by the end of this game, Ellie, Abby, and the player know the same.
The biggest thing for me to come out of this was that Next Generation is already here. There are no loading screens, there is no waiting, everything is seamless, cutscenes to gameplay. Naughty Dog have shown us what the next generation of games consoles are going to be already. But there's much more to this game. I started this review straight away after finishing the game, and as I've got further from the ending, as I've got further from playing it, it's stayed with me, it's played on my mind, and it's become something more than just a video game. It's quite profound in the story it tells, and it's very meaningful in many ways, especially with the world that we're currently living in. This could have so easily been a two-dimensional story of revenge. Instead, Naughty Dog took some brave decisions, from killing Joel off early to making you play half the game as Abby and see the world from her perspective. And the fact that by the time that I got to the final boss battle, with Ellie being the final boss, I didn't want that to happen anymore. It's credit to the writers, it's credit to the actors, it's credit to the direction, it's credit to everybody at that studio. Because they succeeded wholeheartedly with the story that they wanted to tell. They wanted a revenge tale where you didn't want that revenge by the time you got to it. And they succeeded in every single way. As I've got further from finishing the game, I do honestly believe it's a contender for Game of the Generation. It's right up there with God of War, it's right up there with, for me, Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, many of the PlayStation 4 exclusives. It's exceptional in everything it does, from the storytelling to the graphics to the animations. The only thing that pulls this game back slightly is the gameplay itself, because it does become quite tedious towards the end. I mentioned at the start of this review that there were a couple of design choices and directional missteps that prevent this game from being a masterpiece. I feel now, with a bit of distance, with the game having played on my mind over time, that that statement was completely wrong, and that The Last of Us Part 2 is indeed a masterpiece. It's a game that, if you can cope with the nature of it, with the dark, angry gameplay, narrative and characters, is well worth your time. I feel everybody should pick up this game and play it if they can get through the emotional connection. It's definitely a contender for Game of the Year right now, and is well in contention for Game of the Generation, just as its predecessor was. I'd like to thank you all very much for tuning in. And if you've stuck around to this point, definitely a major thank you. This is a hugely long video, one of the longest I've yet made, and took a lot of editing, so thanks for sticking around and hearing me dissect my feelings on this game. I've loved every second with it, even through the angry emotions, and I will be playing it again, probably starting once more this weekend, once this has rendered and uploaded. I'm sorry that it's been so long between videos, but I wanted to get this one out. It was a bit close to my heart with how much I loved the first game. So thank you all very much for sticking around for so long. If you like what you saw, hit that like button. Feel free to tap subscribe. My name is Doragon, and until next time, folks, take care.